Well, a few years ago, I got my first job as a head coach. For years, I had been sort of an assistant coach, second, third coach. I was asked to run the defense or maybe the offensive coordinator, but this was the moment when I was finally tapped to lead the team as the head coach. I had 12 players. We had a deep roster. We ran a series of preseason practices. We were serious about this. We had scrimmages and skills clinics and OTAs. We designed some amazing uniforms because sometimes just looking the part gives you that extra edge that you need on the field. I wrote up plays. I came up with an incredible lineup. And then came the first game of the season, my first as a head coach. The night before, I could barely sleep. I was just thinking through everything in my head, lying awake, wondering about the first 20 plays and what was I going to do if the opposing defense crowded the box and how was I going to adjust the scheme in the middle of the game. I was visualizing victory for my team. So finally, 2 o'clock in the afternoon came on Saturday. It was time for kickoff, and the whistle blew. And my rainbow unicorns, they ran down that field, and it was a sight to see. Now, they were running in the wrong direction, and they had no idea where the ball was, but the way they worked together on this in unison, doing their cartwheels and their cheers, and I have never seen a 5-year-old get stuck in a soccer goal net with such grace. We didn't win a single game that year. I think we scored a single goal the entire season. I remember this one game where we showed up and the opposing team was already there and they were working on their corner kick sets. And I was like, this is not going to be good. So I went to the opposing coach. I said, hey, my rainbow unicorns, they love soccer, but they're kind of new at this. Can you maybe throttle it back a little bit? He said, absolutely. They won 14-0. I've shared this before, but the following season, someone else got the head coaching job, my wife. And I kid you not, the rainbow unicorns went undefeated. Whenever you're working to put together a team or you're looking for a team to join, the way that this tends to work, we want to surround ourselves with the first round, blue chip talent, the best of the best. We want the Dodgers, not the fill in the blank with whatever team, didn't win a lot of games this year. Well, today we're going to look at the team that Jesus put together 2,000 years ago. He chose 12. It's the greatest story of team formation in history. We read about this in Mark chapter 3. We've been in this series walking through the Gospel of Mark, and we're going to begin with verse 13 of Mark 3 today. And Jesus went up on the mountain, and he called to them those whom he desired, and they came to him. And he appointed 12, whom he also named apostles. Now, I want to pause here. Why did Jesus choose 12? It's not like there was some policy or rule about disciple choosing that meant that said he had to have 12. Why 12? Well, this is a loaded, deeply symbolic number because the Israelites had 12 tribes, and God's plan to bring redemption and hope to the whole world through these 12 tribes was clear in the scriptures, but over the years, through the centuries, it got out of whack, and they were sent into exile, and the tribes ended up splintering, and it left God's people wondering, is there still hope? So when Jesus chooses 12 disciples, it's like he's saying to them, God has not given up on this rescue plan and his promises for his people. And so we read in verse 14, and I want us to almost walk through this verse word by word. It says, he appointed 12 so that, in order that they might be what? With him. With him. That's the first and most important part of this, that we might be with him. It is all about being with Jesus. If Jesus is not at the center of who we are and what we're doing as a team, then we have missed the mark. And Jesus appointed 12 so that they might be with him, and then that he might send them out. So there's this being with and sending out dynamic. With and out. Gathered, scattered. This team that Jesus is putting together around him here is not meant to stay in some permanent huddle that never breaks. God is always moving us out, sending, launching into the world, into mission, to make a difference beyond these walls. To do what? He appointed 12 so that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach and have authority to cast out demons. Now, being sent out to preach, that doesn't mean we're all given a pulpit or a corner on a street with a bullhorn so that everybody can hear us preach about how sinful they are. No, the word that Mark uses here is the Greek word kerusso. It means to announce or to proclaim. It means you've become a messenger and you're bearing the words of the one who sent you. And not just in the words you say, but in the manner in which you live and how you serve. And we understand that. We're called to live in a way that puts on display the good news of this message of Jesus. But then this part about having authority to cast out demons, what's up with that? Like, we didn't talk about that a lot in, preaching 101 in seminary. But here's the thing. That word authority is a really big deal. Because something happens when Jesus calls us to himself that sends even the demons running in fear. We are given his authority. We are empowered with his authority, with his power to go out in his name. When you become a follower of Jesus, you're not sent out with Martha Lou's power or with JoJo's power or with H.P. Prez authority. You've got the authority of Jesus Christ in you and over you and stamped on you so that when you go, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords and the Alpha and Omega and the Lion of the tribe of Judah, he is going with you, and there is no evil in this world that can stand in the way of the authority of Jesus Christ, which is in you. That might get a little hushed Presbyterian amen. Jesus called 12 to be with him. You see, he's putting together a little team to learn from him and to follow him and then to be launched out with his authority, his power. Now, as we've said, anytime you're building a team, you're going after certain kinds of people. It's the first round, fastest 40, strongest, quickest rainbow unicorns you can find. Well, here's the original roster. Here's the team of young men that Jesus called to himself, and we're just going to walk through this one by one as we make our way through Mark's gospel. This list of 12 disciples, and we start, as all the gospels do, with Simon Peter. We're told that Jesus gave Simon this new name, Peter, which means rock or rocky. Now, Peter, if you read through the Gospels, he's always trying to lead the way. He was the first to try and walk on water when he saw Jesus doing it. Later, when the soldiers came to arrest Jesus, Peter's the one that stands up and he gets all fired up and he pulls out a sword and he cuts off somebody's ear, which always reminds me, bear with me for a moment, of that scene in Princess Bride, My Name is Inigo Montoya, Prepare to Die. Does any resonance with that one? Okay, we'll keep going to the next one. Peter's a little impulsive. He makes these bold statements about his unyielding loyalty to Jesus only to go back on his words like moments later. Peter's the kind of guy whose heart is bigger than his brain. He makes bad decisions. He's impulsive. He overpromises and underdelivers over and over again. He says things he wishes he could just put back into his mouth. Anybody ever struggle with that? As a pastor, sometimes you're called on to say stuff in front of a lot of people, and sometimes those words are really important, like getting the names right at a wedding or a funeral, it's not the kind of stuff you want to mess up. A few years ago, I was officiating at one of my best friend's wedding, and when we got to the heart of the ceremony, which of course are the wedding vows, this was one of my best friends, but I got really nervous, and so I said, "Do you, Mitch, take Catherine to be your wife?" And he said, "I do, but my name's Matthew, you dummy." Okay, that was a Simon Peter foot and mouth moment. Jesus says to Simon, even in your failures, even in your mess ups, I want you. I choose you. And by the way, I'm giving you a new name. You are Peter. You are the rock upon which I will build this team. So then after Simon Peter, you've got two brothers named James and John. And if you look in that text, they're called sons of thunder. One way to translate that is sons of anger. So these are two guys who kind of fly by the seat of their pants. In fact, there's a story later in the Gospels where the disciples are making their way through Samaria. And if you know the history of the tensions, the Samaritans and the Israelites are despised enemies. Like they don't like each other at all. And so the disciples with Jesus, they're making their way through this Samaritan town. And at one point, James and John, sons of thunder, as they're walking through this town, they say, "Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven to destroy these Samaritans?" And Jesus is like, no, guys, we don't burn people up. That's not how healthy grown-ups or small groups, operate and deal with conflict. No, we're not going to do that today. So Jesus is thinking about his team to launch this movement into the world, a movement that's built on sacrificial love and affection and kindness and patience. And he says, hey, sons of thunder, I want you two guys leading the way. Anger management, like we're going to figure this out together. Then you've got Andrew. And Andrew is usually referred to as Simon Peter's brother. Now, what's interesting about this is that Andrew was actually the first one to meet Jesus, right? Andrew was the one who dragged his brother over and said, hey, bro, you got to meet this guy. But then it's like his brother shows up and sort of takes all the attention, and so that now anywhere Andrew goes from here on out, he is Simon Peter's brother. I wonder if Andrew kind of lived under the shadow of his life of the party brother his whole life. Growing up, he never got a word in. The family dinner table. He's the middle child syndrome, any of you? My wife, Allie, is a middle child, a listen-first introvert sandwiched between two Red Bull, highly extroverted, life-of-the-party boys. Barely got a word in. But here's the thing about Andrew. Again, if we're walking through the 12, if you look at Andrew in the Gospels, what is he always doing? He's bringing people to Jesus. Right? He's not as fiery or upfront as his brother Peter. He's not looking for attention. All he does when he meets someone, he's like, hey, I can't wait to introduce you to Jesus. And this is kind of cool. Today as a church, we're actually celebrating the ordination of another guy named Andrew, who's been on our team the last few years. Andrew Franklin, he's being ordained right now as we speak in our Elliott Hall worship gathering. And one of the things I love about our Andrew is that he too has this passion to bring people to Jesus, especially those who, for whatever reason, don't think they would measure up or belong in a place like this. And I was thinking about how, as a whole church, we could kind of come together to show our love and encouragement for Andrew. And I thought one of the ways we could do that is if everybody in the whole church texted Andrew, because he's a millennial. He doesn't answer his phone anyways. Probably doesn't even know what a voicemail is. So this is his literal phone number. This is not a burner line, I promise. He's gotten a few hundred already, and he's like, man, what is going on today? So if you want to text him, seriously, and just say, hey, we're so thankful that God has called you here. Can't wait to see you in the black robe. Whatever it is you want to say to newly ordained Andrew Franklin, just go ahead and send him the phone number, the text to that phone number, and I can't wait to see what he does back in revenge. So that's Andrew. Next you have, we probably should take the number down at this point here. Everyone watching online, the thousands of people who are going to be sending him text messages. Next you have Philip. One thing to note about Philip is that he's from the same hometown as Peter and Andrew and James and John. Sometimes when you've got a team of 12 and there are like 5 people from the same small town, the temptation is to gather together on your own a little bit, right? In your own little clique of sorts on the team. And it's not like you're trying to be malicious, it's just you're comfortable with them. You've got history, you tell the same stories, you laugh at the same inside jokes, but sometimes that sort of cliquish behavior can actually end up undoing the whole team. And it can make other people feel like they're left out. And friends, churches deal with this all the time. After years of doing life together, a Sunday school class or a small group that is so tightly knit, or you have been through some struggles with people, and that creates community and intimacy. And sometimes it gets so tightly knit and the bond becomes so strong that it's actually hard for new people to break in. Again, it's not malicious, it's just the inertia of community. And so maybe one of the challenges for you, if you've been in this community for a long time, is to kind of always be thinking about the open chair, the open door. To always be thinking about the person who's not yet on your team. And maybe even as a little challenge for this Highland Park church team is, they can start with lunch today. We're having lunch on the front lawn. Weather's perfect. It feels like fall, finally. We haven't done this in a couple years. So before you go looking for your favorite people, and I'm so thankful you've got those people on your team. It's not a bad thing. But as you're doing that, maybe you could be looking for somebody you don't yet know, or somebody who it seems like they might be unfamiliar to this place. And as you're building that community and looking for your people, just invite them along. All right, next disciple, Bartholomew. And we don't know much about Bartholomew. His name, though, is interesting. Bar is the Hebrew for son. Tholomai is something to do with plowing the fields. So unlike the other disciples who were mostly associated with fishing, Bartholomew had maybe spent a little bit more time in the fields. And I was just thinking, maybe when Jesus was telling the parable of the sower, that fabulous parable that we're going to look at next week, maybe as he told that parable, Jesus was looking at Bartholomew. And he's like, I see you, Bart. I got a story for you as well. Then there's Matthew. We talked about Matthew 2 weeks ago, otherwise known as Levi. What's his background? Tax collector. Kind of a shady job. Not a lot of people have big love for the tax collectors. In fact, there was this one political group who, more than anyone else, they hated tax collectors. They hated them because they were cozying up to the Romans, whom they pretty much despised more than anything in the world. And these were known as the Zealots, all right? This political affiliated group that they were literally trying to start revolutions to undermine the power of the Roman Empire. And so Jesus here, he's putting together his starting 12, and he chooses Matthew, despised tax collector, a pawn of the Roman Empire, and then he finds this other guy named Simon, whom we're told is a what? Verse 18. A zealot. And he puts him on the same team. He says, Matthew, Simon, this is the place where you're going to learn how to love and forgive and bear with one another and put behind old enemy ways. And you're going to show the world what it looks like to love in my name. All right, you think you've got problems or drama in your small group or Sunday school. Just, that's nothing new. Next, you have Thomas. Now, what is Thomas most known for? Doubting Thomas. He's always asking questions. Like, he's the one, he believes in Jesus enough to leave everything behind and be his follower, but he's a work in progress. He's not sure yet. He's still a little skeptical. And that's why we're so committed to be in a kind of community that makes room for those who still have questions. Skeptics, doubters, we welcome that here. We are not intimidated by that. And we just keep pointing one another back to Jesus, because he is big enough to handle those doubts. Just a few more. There's another disciple named James, and he has the blessing of going down in history as James the Less, right? How would you like to be in the Bible as Caroline the Less or Callum the Less? But he's on the team too. Then there's Thaddeus, and we never hear of Thaddeus again. About the only thing I can think of distinctive here is he's got the hardest name to spell. There's 2 A's in Thaddeus, in case you were wondering. Thank you very much. All right, there's one more disciple. We've gone through 11. Who are we missing here? Judas. Judas Iscariot. And Mark adds this little note, verse 19. He says, it's sort of an asterisk, which will follow Judas wherever he goes in the Bible, the one who betrayed him. Backstabber, conniver, betrayer, sell his soul for a few lousy bucks. Judas, who will forever be known as the guy who turned on Jesus. You don't get any lower than that. And yet he's on the team, recruited, pursued, called, invited to be with Jesus. And there's a part of me that's kind of grateful that Judas made the team. Because I think of all the times I sell out, or I turn my back, or I betray what should be most important in my life. And yet Jesus still desires me and calls me and still wants to send me out. Just to step back, all of us, for a moment and to take a look at this team. Impulsive, anger issues, overlooked, cheating, money swindling, revolution rising, doubting, stab you in your back. This is Jesus' starting 12. These were not the head of the class, national merit, front row in the church, top 10%. They didn't win any awards at seminary graduation. The whole time they're with Jesus, it's like they don't get it. They're slow on the uptake. When Jesus is being literal, they think it's metaphorical. When he's being metaphorical, they try to take him literally. They're always a few steps behind, and yet at no point in the Gospels does Jesus ever stop and say, time out, somebody get me a new 12. Like, I'm done with these guys. Which means he's never gonna say that to you, and he'll never say that to me. I want you to think for just a moment what an astounding thing it is. Jesus is coming up with a plan to literally change the world for eternity. And we're here 2,000 years later because he chose these 12 unqualified disciples. He handpicked them. And to see how outrageous this is, you have to understand the Jewish culture and background here, that to become a disciple was like every young boy's dream, to go up and have a chance to follow a rabbi. It's what kids dreamed about. In our day, the kids have slightly different dreams. Our son Wheeler wants to play professional lacrosse when he grows up. And so I called up the only guy I know who's ever played professional lacrosse, Chris Hips. He grew up in this church. He was an All-American in college, got drafted, played pro lacrosse. I called him up. I said, Chris, what is the starting salary for a professional lacrosse player? And he said, well, they buy you the plane tickets so you can fly to the games on Saturday when you're done working your real job during the week. I said, Wheeler, we got to pick another sport, buddy. But in that day, every young Jewish kid's dream was to be a disciple. And it was only the best of the best, the cream of the crop, 1 in 1,000 who would eventually get that opportunity. These were the kids with the perfect resumes, never made a mistake. And if you were one of these elite students, there was a way that you were matched with a rabbi, and it's a little like how we apply for college, which some of you I know are working on right now. So you would go to the rabbi that you most wanted to study under as a young man. Very intentional process. And the disciple, the potential disciple would say to the rabbi, can I please follow you, become your student? And the rabbi would say, well, recite for me the 119th Psalm. And this kid could do it from memory. He would nail it, no problem. Then the rabbi would say, tell me, young student, how many times does the prophet Isaiah use the word servant? And so the student has memorized Isaiah and he's working through it, and he finally says, 17. And the rabbi says, nope, 18. Good luck. You obviously love God. You want to honor God. But I'm sorry, you just don't have what it takes to be one of my disciples. Only the best of the best made it this far, which brings us back to Jesus. 14 times in the Gospels, Jesus is referred to as rabbi. That was not a throwaway term that anybody got. To be a rabbi was the pinnacle of achievement. By the age of 30, Jesus had been through the most rigorous academic spiritual preparation process in the world, and he had graduated magna cum laude. He was now a rabbi with the authority to have his own disciples. And so we come to the beginning of the Gospels, and what do we find in Mark 1? As Jesus walked beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and Andrew casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. So Andrew and Simon are fishing. What does that mean? That means they've already dropped out of discipleship school. They weren't smart enough or spiritual enough to make the cut, so they gave up on the dream of becoming a disciple. But then the rabbi comes and he says, verse 17, come, follow me, and I will send you out to fish for people. Okay, wait a second. Jesus, you got this mixed up. You're supposed to wait for them to come to you, and especially these kind of washed out, dropout fishermen. These are not the guys you're supposed to go after. Verse 19, when he had gone a little further, he saw James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John in a boat preparing their nets. Again, they're fishing, family business, dropouts, not disciple material. Without delay, he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men and followed him. Isn't that great? They didn't even bother to row the boat back to shore. They jumped out and swam to Jesus because this rabbi said to them, John, I choose you. Now, we don't know for sure, but based on cultural norms, these disciples were 15, maybe 16 years old. Jesus put the future of his kingdom movement into the hands of sophomores. The point is, a rabbi would never go looking for disciples. They were above that. They didn't recruit Students came to them and begged them, am I worthy? Can I follow you? And Jesus does the unthinkable. He goes to these washouts and he says, I want you on my team. Come and follow me. Imagine what it must have been like for these dropouts to get one more shot, to have a rabbi who believed in them, weren't smart enough or spiritual enough, hadn't achieved enough, and yet he chose them, and they left their nets, and they walked away, and they did it with a little bit of swagger, because now they were disciples. They had a rabbi. And now the rabbi comes to us, and he says, I want you, and I want you. I choose you, and you, and you. Will you follow me? Come be on my team. And that's the invitation. That's the word that Jesus offers to every one of us. Would you be on his team? Would you be a disciple? Would you leave whatever it is that's in your past, whatever your nets are, and follow him?